Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Principia College's 63rd Annual Public Affairs Conference. My name is Amy Baldauf, and I am one of the executive directors of this year's conference. Since its inception in 1939, the mission of PAC has been to inspire active citizenship and participation in global affairs. This year's topic, Peacebuilding, a new approach to conflict resolution, will showcase the work that is being done across the world to build peace. Our opening speaker, Mr. Chic Dambach, is one of the leading experts on the concept of peacebuilding. Mr. Dambach became Chief of Staff for Congressman John Garamendi in 2011. Previously, Mr. Dambach was president of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, a network of organizations and professionals who work to build sustainable peace and security worldwide. He helped lead the global effort to define and establish the concept of peacebuilding and to incorporate a peacebuilding framework into government policies. In partnership with Harriet Fulbright, he produced the first global symposium of peaceful nations in 2009. He has held national CEO positions at the National Peace Corps Association, Operation Respect, and the National Assembly of Local Arts Agencies. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia from 1967 to 1969. Mr. Dambach has recorded his incredible personal story in his riveting memoir, Exhaust the Limits, The Life and Times of a Global Peacebuilder. Mr. Dambach has a Bachelor of Arts in Speech and Communications from Oklahoma State University and a Master's of Business Administration from Wake Forest University. Well, I think you can all agree with me that we are in for a truly inspiring evening. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming the opening speaker of this year's conference, Mr. Chic Dambach.
Thank you very much, Amy. I really appreciate that introduction, and it's such a treat to get to know you and Shannon and Lauren and all of the people on your committee, your group that has made all of this possible. I'm just in awe of the professionalism and the quality of the work that you've done. President Palmer, students, this is a very special place to be. I am thoroughly enjoying getting out of Washington, for one thing. But being here is a real treat. And I cannot tell you how thrilled I was when I got the invitation to come here and saw the topic of your conference this year, peacebuilding. And you'll better understand why I feel so strongly about that as you hear my comments this evening, because that is a term that virtually did not exist a decade ago. Just a decade ago, a few people were using it. I think they all knew each other, the people that were using that term. It was not a part of the nation's or the global vocabulary. Some of us who are in this room and others throughout the country and around the world worked really hard to get this concept to be defined and understood and embraced. And the fact that students at this college, looking at the issues they wanted to discuss, identified that term as defining what they wanted to talk about this year, for me, was a glorious moment of recognition that we're there. We've made it. This is now a part of the national and the international lexicon, and it is a part of the dialogue of what's going on in the world. And that, as you will see in my comments and in what happens in this conference, is absolutely revolutionary. It is revolutionary. For the first time in human history, we are studying war to determine how to prevent the next war, not just how to win it. Think about that. Never happened before. It's happening now. We are trying to prevent warfare rather than just win the next war. Absolutely revolutionary. Getting to the right terminology took some time and some work. Melanie Greenberg is here. You'll be hearing from her tomorrow, I believe. She was part of this, Lisa Shirk and several of the other wonderful people I've had the privilege of working with, wrestled with the terminology. And part of the reason this was so important, we had worked through a number of different terms. The organization that I ran up until recently, and Melanie now runs, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, was called ACRON, Applied Conflict Resolution Organizations Network. Right, Melanie? That didn't get us anywhere. What the heck is that? And then it was changed to the Alliance for International Conflict Prevention and Resolution. A little bit closer, but still didn't really get there. So we really grappled with that, because language has tremendous power. And when you can use a term and people understand it wherever they may be, it has a huge impact. But if you use this amorphous language that nobody can really grasp and understand, you just don't get anywhere. We really grappled with this and tried some of the things that you see up there. Building peace, peace building as being separate words, peace building hyphenated, or peace building all one word. We settled on peace building all one word. And the reason for that is that the whole concept is that, yes, peace is wonderful and everybody wants peace, and people have been praying for peace for millennia. They have been demonstrating for peace, certainly for centuries, without getting us there. And the reason is that peace has to be built. It has to be built. And by wedding those two words, peace and building, into one word, one concept, it helps convey that message that it isn't something that just happens accidentally. It's something that happens intentionally. When you build something, you do it intentionally. And that is the new framework that has just come about within the last couple of decades and is just now coming to maturity. Think about the impact of that and what it can do for your lifetime to reduce the frequency and severity of violent conflict on this planet. That's what we're doing, and that is the opportunity that you have to carry forward. It is a new and effective citizen-based phenomenon. And this is the other remarkable and exciting thing about it. This didn't come from any government anywhere. This came from private citizens throughout the world. This didn't come just from the United States. This came from throughout the world, a recognition that the use of violent force is not reasonable, rational, or acceptable, but that we've got to find a way of doing something about it, and building peace is the way to do it. Therefore, peace building. Now, we used to use the term conflict prevention. And when I started to get involved with this, I had a problem with that, because as far as I'm concerned, conflict is a normal thing, and it can even be a healthy thing. It's the way we progress as we come up with different ideas, different ways of doing things that clash and conflict with the old way of doing things, and then you work it out, and that's how humanity moves forward. So I don't have a problem with conflict. I think it's normal and even healthy. Violence, however, is neither normal nor healthy. It's violence that we're concerned about. How many of you who are grown up have children, or if you're not yet grown up and having children, how many of you grew up with brothers or sisters? Most all of you. Did you ever get into squabbles and fights where you disagreed over something pretty strongly? How many? Just about the same number. Did your parents give you hand grenades? No? No? Okay, just wondering. You ever hear of neighbors who didn't particularly like each other and didn't want the neighbor encroaching into their territory? You ever hear of that happening? Do they plant landmines along the border between their houses? Just wondering. When corporations get into a dispute with one another, Microsoft and Google a couple of years ago got into a major dispute. Did they drop bombs on each other's headquarters? Well, no, they didn't. Why not? Because it would be stupid, right? It would be stupid. Well, then will somebody please explain to me why it is that at the nation-state level, using hand grenades, using landmines, using bombs is considered to be honorable, noble, and patriotic. Please explain that to me, will you? I've asked that question hundreds of times. I have yet to get an answer. I've asked that question of heads of state. No answer. No answer. Because there is no answer. It's stupid. And I use the term stupid because one of the great warriors in this country's history and the world's history used the same word to describe what war is all about. I hate war as only a soldier who has lived it can, only as one who has seen its brutality, its futility, its stupidity. That was General Dwight David Eisenhower, the guy that won the war in Europe, World War II, then became president. It's stupid. But if we're going to do something about it, we need to have an alternative. We need to recognize that war is about people. It is not about numbers, but we have to have an alternative. So my premise for peace building is that the use of violent force is not reasonable, it's not rational, it's not acceptable. If we can start with that premise, and I have presented that premise, I say, I lecture regularly at West Point. Now you would think, hearing what I'm talking about, that the people of West Point would disagree totally with what I'm talking about. Not so. In fact, I get a warm welcome, a warm embrace from my friends in the military at West Point and at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon. They say, you're absolutely right, Chic, and let's work together and make it so that none of us ever have to go to war again. They agree that the use of violent force is not reasonable, rational, or acceptable. That peace makes sense. Everybody, everywhere, agrees that peace makes sense. What is not as clear and not as well embraced is the notion that peace is possible. But as we talk through what we're doing and as we look at what's happening in the world, increasingly people are beginning to recognize that indeed it is possible, and I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it has to be built. Therefore, what we call peace building. Now, I had the privilege of being the president of the National Peace Corps the Alliance for Peace Building, at the time that this was coalescing in the United States and worldwide. And so people were, of course, asking me to come up with a definition of peace building. If you're going to promote this, Chic, you gotta define it. And so I did, and I don't know who submits this stuff to Wikipedia, but somebody picked up on the definition that I had written up, and they put it on Wikipedia as the central definition of peace building. So if nothing else impresses my kids, that impresses my kids. Dad must not be too bad if he's quoted in Wikipedia. So therefore, my moment of glory, let me read this definition of peace building. And then Melanie can disagree. She may have something else, and she is the expert on it, so be sure you listen to what she has to say. But this is the definition that I came up with. And by the way, Melanie helped me with this, as did my colleagues when I was at the Alliance for Peace Building. Peace building is the set of initiatives by diverse actors in government and civil society to address the root causes of violence, to protect civilians before, during, and after violent conflict. Peace builders use communication, negotiation, and mediation instead of belligerence and violence to resolve conflicts. Effective peace building is multifaceted and adapted to each conflict environment. There is no one path to peace, but pathways are always available in every conflict environment. Peace builders help belligerents find a path that will enable them to resolve their differences without bloodshed. The ultimate objective of peace building is to reduce and eliminate the frequency and severity of violent conflict. It's a comprehensive concept that recognizes the multiple factors that cause and drive people to use violent force. But if applied, and if actually done, we know we can prevent the outbreak of violence or if it has already broken out, we know that we can mitigate it and bring it to an end. And in a post-conflict environment, we know we can bring about reconciliation, stabilization, reconstruction, and that societies can get on with their lives in a positive and peaceful way. It can be done. It is being done. Let me take you through a little bit of the history of peacebuilding. As far as I'm concerned, the founder of peacebuilding was Lysistrata back in 411 BC. Any of you know the story of Lysistrata? Lysistrata was a woman in Greece during the Peloponnesian Wars. And the men had all gone off to fight the war, and Lysistrata thought that was pretty stupid. She had read my speech. She thought it was stupid. She mobilized the women of Greece to deny sex to the soldiers until they stopped the fighting. The war ended immediately. Did. First peace builder, Lysistrata. We have women emerging as leaders in the peace-building field right now, and I say to them, we could have peace tomorrow if you would just form a global Lysistrata brigade, get all the women in the world to agree to that one basic premise, and we would have peace for now and forevermore. Unfortunately, that has not happened worldwide. It did happen, by the way, very recently in the African country of Liberia. The women of Liberia did exactly that, and it stopped the war. So don't think it's totally a foolish idea. It can actually happen, and when it does, it's effective. Well, you have to fast forward a long ways because a lot of dreadful things happened worldwide back in those early days. You go all the way forward to 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, in which it was agreed, at least in the Western world, that the sovereignty of nations would be honored and respected. That is, that the national boundaries were sacred and that you would not cross borders to fight with your neighbors. Now, obviously, not everybody lived up to that, but at least there was an agreement to that principle, and it did indeed reduce cross-border warfare. Obviously, not completely. We went through a lot of cross-border warfare, all the way up through two colossal world wars. Coming out of the First World War, there was an attempt to bring about the League of Nations to make it the war to end all wars. Obviously, that didn't happen. We did a better job coming out of World War II by creating the United Nations. And don't let anyone tell you the United Nations is a failure. The United Nations is an extraordinary success. It operates on a minuscule budget, and it takes on the toughest problems in the entire world, and it tries to do so bringing together people with different languages, different cultures, different economic situations, different interests, try to bring them all together to agree to collectively resolve these problems. That's not easy. Furthermore, and whenever any of my friends, and I've got friends who disagree with me on these things, whenever they rail against the United Nations, what a waste it is and so on, and ineffective, and I say, now wait a second. If you were to create a corporation and give it 5 board members, each of whom had a veto against anything, just any one of those 5 could prevent that corporation or that organization or that college or university from doing what you want them to do. Any one of the 5 could do it, and those 5 didn't like each other. And you structured it so that that's the way the decisions would be made. How effective do you think it would be? Now, who created the United Nations that way? We did. We did, because we didn't want it to be very effective. That's why. And in spite of that, it has done an extraordinary job of reducing violent conflict on this planet and building cooperation among the nations of this world. The United Nations has been a phenomenal success, and we've got to stand behind it and continue to support it and help it move forward. But obviously, the UN didn't solve all the problems, and it continues to do great work, but not solve all the problems. During the 1980s and 1990s, and it may be that coming out of Vietnam and the horrible killing fields of Cambodia, that there was some things happened in the 1960s and 70s that were so horrible that private citizens worldwide recognized that our government leaders may be willing to go to war, but we are not, recognizing the stupidity of warfare. And so civil society organizations, non-government organizations, private citizens started coming together and creating organizations to address this issue of warfare. In 1984, the U.S. government recognized it and created something called the U.S. Institute of Peace. Now, it is a tiny, tiny, tiny agency. But at least our government agreed that we ought to at least do something about trying to build a more peaceful world and created the U.S. Institute of Peace. Prior to that, there was no government agency. Now, we had the Peace Corps, but I'll talk a little more about the Peace Corps in a few minutes. I love the Peace Corps. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. But it does very little about directly dealing with violent conflict. So the U.S. Institute of Peace was created to try to help prevent the outbreak of violent conflict. Move forward to 2003, the incorporation of ACRON, then AICPR, and finally the Alliance for Peacebuilding, which was, at least in this country, the effort to bring together leaders of the organizations that were doing this kind of work. In 2005, the United Nations created a Peacebuilding Commission, and the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict was formed, a global network of organizations doing this kind of work. 2007, something called the Global Peace Index was created to rank the countries of the world based on their peacefulness. We pay attention to things we can measure. How about measuring peacefulness and recognizing who's the most peaceful? And by the way, the primary purpose of the index was to identify who's peaceful. We know who's violent because they're in the news all the time. Who's peaceful and what are they doing right? And what can we learn from them? And as was mentioned in the introduction, Harriet Fulbright and I teamed up to create the Global Symposium of Peaceful Nations to bring together representatives from the most peaceful countries of the world, give them an award for being peaceful, and to learn from them. And there are now at least 2,000, and probably many more than that, organizations worldwide whose primary function is to help prevent the outbreak of violence. And they have done remarkable work throughout the world. Here are just a couple of them that I'll highlight. Of course, the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission, the U.S. Institute of Peace, and within it, the Academy for International Conflict Management and Peacebuilding. This is the Peacebuilding and the Arts now is out of Brandeis University up in Massachusetts, and of course, the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Just a tiny sampling of the organizations that are doing this kind of work. If you checked Amazon 50 years ago, how many checked Amazon 50 years ago to buy books? Not a single hand. I'm amazed. If there had been an Amazon 50 years ago, and if you did a search for peacebuilding, you might have gotten a handful of books. You might not have gotten any, actually, because they didn't exist. If you go home and check it tonight, you'll find at least 922 books on peacebuilding. It may have gone up because there may be another few come out in the last couple of days, because I just checked yesterday and found the 922 figure. This is just a couple of the titles. We've got Peacebuilding, our good friend Dennis Sandelay. Building Peace came out from GPAC. Lisa Shirk, I'm featuring some of my friends up here, by the way. Lisa Shirk in Strategic Peacebuilding. U.S. Peace Fair, what the U.S. government does for peacebuilding, Dane Smith, a good friend of mine. And, of course, the one in the lower right-hand corner from your perspective is the best one of all. It's called Exhaust the Limits. That's my book. Had to slip that in. The bookseller says I got to promote the book, so I'm going to promote the book. Peace studies, virtually non-existent 30, 40, 50 years ago. When I went to college, I did not study peace studies because I couldn't study peace studies. There was no curriculum in peace studies 50 years ago. Did not exist. Now, the Peace Studies Association indicates 223 accredited graduate programs in peace studies. Truly extraordinary. And I would bet you that more than half of those came about within the last decade. Truly extraordinary. This had never, ever happened before in human history. It's happening now. Think of the implication of this. All of these students learning how to build a more peaceful world. And again, I put up just a couple of examples. Got to put Harvard at the top. They're always ranked number one and everything else, so I didn't want to upset things. That's why I put them up at the top. Their program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. The George Mason program, the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, the first major program of its kind in this country and still among the biggest, if not the biggest. Kroc Institute at Notre Dame, and there's another Kroc Institute at the University of San Diego. School for International Studies, Graduate Institute now has a Master of Arts in Peacebuilding. These things didn't exist, the SIT program, just within the last couple of years. Brand new stuff. We're actually starting to focus on how we can go about building a more peaceful world. Now, as I said, personally, I didn't get to start off with this. I didn't get to study peacebuilding when I was in school because it wasn't there. I wouldn't have done it anyway, to be quite honest, because when I was in college, I didn't even think about any of this kind of stuff. I went to college on a football scholarship. Not that many people on football scholarship think about building a more peaceful world. In fact, you think about what damage we can do to the other team. I won't tell you what happened when we played Missouri. I got hammered, but that's another story. We'll pass on that one. But I did have the opportunity. This was the 1960s. After I got hurt and couldn't play football anymore, started reading some books and thinking about some things and recognized that there was a war going on in Vietnam. And I was ready to join the Army and go kill the commies because it just seemed like that's what we were supposed to do. Until I started to do some research. And I found out that what was going on in Vietnam had little to do with communism. It had everything to do with the pride of a people, and they're determined to live independently from control of other countries around the world. That's different. So why are we over there killing them literally by the millions? By the millions. Over 3 million Vietnamese died in that war. Nobody in this country knows that. Nobody knows that number. 3 million Vietnamese. We know 58,000 Americans were killed in that war. That's tragic enough. How about 3 million Vietnamese? I did my homework. I found out that's what was going on. I said, this is wrong. This is absolutely wrong. And became a part of the 60s student activist movement, part of the anti-war movement, and I'm proud of it to this day. We were right. And the people that led this country into that war have acknowledged that we were right. Even the people that are responsible for starting our involvement in that, Robert McNamara and others, acknowledged that they were wrong. They even knew they were wrong. They knew they were wrong, and yet they persisted. Those of us who objected and protested against it were right. We did the right thing. So that's where I first started thinking about this. But I came out of that and started thinking, well, gee, if that war is wrong, what about the rest of them? And that's where my mind started to shift in this direction where we are right now, that the use of violent force is just plain wrong, stupid. I joined the Peace Corps coming out of college. Fantastic experience in Colombia, South America. And there I learned another lesson that has served me so well, and I wish everybody in this country would learn it. And that is that when we deal with people in other parts of the world, it is not our right, our role, or our responsibility to tell them what to do and how to do it. Rather, when we engage with other people in other parts of the world, we need to be willing to listen to them, learn from them, respect them for who they are and what they believe and what they want to achieve, and recognize that together we can accomplish significant things. You need to persevere. Being a Peace Corps volunteer is not easy. You're living at a poverty level. I was paid $100 a month and lived on $100 a month and enjoyed it, quite frankly. But it wasn't easy. Got dysentery. Everybody gets dysentery in the Peace Corps. If you're in the Peace Corps and don't get dysentery, I'm sorry, you weren't in the Peace Corps. It's just part of being in the Peace Corps. And it's not easy. Pretty painful. But you deal with it. You learn to deal with it. Because the people you're living with, that's easy for them. They've got all kinds of diseases, and yet they go on, carry on with very valuable and meaningful lives. So you learn to persevere, and you learn to enjoy the adventure. You're not going to save the world as a Peace Corps volunteer, but you can make a difference, and you can really, really enjoy this extraordinary opportunity that you have. But I learned how to persevere and to stay with the struggle. One of the books that I read in college that became extremely meaningful to me, and it's part of the reason I use the title I do for the book, is the story of the myth of Sisyphus, and Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill. And as you know, the mythology of it is that Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to an eternal damnation, and his damnation was to push this rock up the hill, only to have it roll back down to the bottom, and he'd have to push it back up, and he'd be doing that throughout eternity. throughout eternity. Albert Camus, the existentialist philosopher and the great writer, in his essays on the myth of Sisyphus, said, you know, that's really the human condition. We go through life trying to accomplish things, and it rolls back down, and we try again, it rolls back down, and in the end we die. The ultimate rolling back down to the bottom of the hill. Said, but, Camus said, it's the struggle itself that gives meaning and value to our lives. And he concludes his essay on the myth of Sisyphus saying, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. And when I think about the work that I try to do to build a more peaceful world, it's a pretty big rock to push. Pretty big rock. And we don't always succeed. War breaks out and you say, oh man, failed again. Rock rolled back down again. Got to start pushing yet again. And I know all of us in the peacebuilding field feel that way when we see new violence break out in any part of the world. But you put your shoulder back to that rock again, you say, yeah, but I can do something about it. And with myself and with my friends and my colleagues, and the more people we can get pushing on that rock, the higher it's going to get. And I really believe that we get it a little bit higher every time we push. And that's why I never give up. Because I'm just like Sisyphus, pushing that rock up the hill. And it has meaning, value, and even joy. But what about peace? Is it just a vision for idealistic fools, an impossible dream? Or is it achievable and essential? The fact of the matter is that in spite of what you see on television and what you read in the newspapers, we are living in probably the most peaceful period in human history. Steven Pinker, in his remarkable book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined, documents in great detail the extraordinary progress of humanity from the beginning of time up to where we are right now. Among other things, he quotes a lot of the stories in the Bible. Have you ever read the Old Testament? My God. Absolute, total destruction of one village after another, one tribe after another, where it describes brutally killing every living thing. Every living thing. If that were to happen today, we would be horrified at whoever perpetuated that genocide. Back then, it was the norm. It was the norm. Look at ancient Rome. What did they go to the Colosseum to cheer for? Utter brutality. Killing people. Yay, kill them, kill them. We say kill them in a football stadium today, we mean score a touchdown. They meant it. It was real. Kill them meant kill them. We've made a lot of progress. You read your European history, you read about the 100-Year War, you read about the 30-Year War. Man, and it was brutal, brutal. You read the Chinese history, brutal history. The conquest of this continent, I dare say, was pretty darn brutal. The people who were here before, those who look like most of us in this room, were brutalized, really brutal. We did that. Our ancestors did that. We wouldn't tolerate anything like that today. The Civil War. Have you ever been to Antietam, the battlefield in Maryland? It has markers for every one of the casualties in one day of fighting. One day in the Civil War. 22,000. 22,000 casualties in one day of the Civil War. Doesn't happen today. Doesn't happen today. We've come a long ways. Torture was just the norm throughout human history. Just the norm. Everybody practiced torture. If you were in power and you want to keep people under control, you tortured them. Brutal torture. We don't tolerate torture anymore. And when this country made what I think was a colossal mistake a few years ago and condoned it, we were horrified by what we were doing, and the entire world was horrified by what this great country had done, this horrible mistake we had made. The documentation indicates that just over the last 15 to 20 years, there are about 40% fewer wars than there were then, and 80% fewer casualties just over the last 15 to 20 years since the end of the Cold War. That's pretty remarkable. Now, it's not that we're there yet. There are some 25 wars going on around the world right now, most of them at a fairly low scale, but the definition of war is 1,000 casualties a year, so that we've got it going on. Civilian as well as combatant casualties are up. There are dozens of vulnerable states that could fall into it. There are currently 16 UN peacekeeping operations going on around the world, and the cost of war is outrageous. The economists indicate that it costs about $60 billion for every war. That is the negative effect on the economy of that society and the world, about $60 billion for every war. The overall negative impact of war on the economy of the world, some $7.2 trillion a year in negative impact. And there are persistent and growing threats, certainly population growth and migration, cultural and sectarian confrontations, climate change, scarce resources, the fights over water and energy, non-state actors, extremists and terrorists, and the proliferations of weapons of mass destruction and of weapons of small destruction, rifles and hand grenades and landmines. All those are threats that we still have to deal with, so we're not there yet. We've not accomplished it. But if violence, not violence, then what? And I say it's peace building. It's active. This isn't soft stuff. This isn't just marching in the streets and saying peace now. This is active and intentional. It is strategic. It is intelligent people, professionals thinking through what needs to be done and making it happen. It happens in government and civil society. It addresses the root causes, not just the proximate or the immediate cause of the violence, but the root causes. It can happen before, during, and after violent conflict. It involves communication, negotiation, and mediation. It's multifaceted. It's adapted to the local environment, the local situation, and it is persistent. Key ingredients in effective peace building is to build trust, learn to listen, demonstrate respect, be objective, balanced, and fair, maintain a positive attitude, sustain commitment, and be persistent, never give up. I've said that a time or two, haven't I? And there's a reason that I say it over and over again, because it's what it takes. Peace builders develop attitudes and the political will to refrain from the use of violence. They design and build systems and mechanisms to resolve conflicts. If you're talking with belligerents who are at war or wanting to go to war, and you say that's stupid, they'll acknowledge that it's stupid. They say, but what choice do we have? We have no choice. We must go to war. Peace builders help create and build and guide belligerents to an alternative method of resolving their differences so that they do not find it in their best interest or necessary to resort to the use of violent conflict. What we do is apply the rule of law, protect human rights, diffuse hostilities, engage in bottom-up dialogue, use negotiation and mediation, achieve reconciliation, produce equitable economic growth, and establish democratic institutions. Those are among the fundamental principles and the things that peace builders actually do. Now, just to be clear about something, there's terminology that you hear all the time of peace building, peacemaking, and peacekeeping. Three words that are bring together two words. So just to make sure there's a clear understanding of the difference, peace building is the construction of safe and secure social, economic, and political systems where conflicts are resolved without violence. It's looking at the large picture and bring it all together to make it all happen. Peacemaking is negotiation, mediation, arbitration to halt ongoing conflicts. When you hear about peacemaking, it's a part of peace building. It's where you're dealing with the conflict itself and finding a way to resolve that conflict so that you either prevent the violence from happening right then and there or end the violence that's going on. That's what peacemaking is. Peacekeeping is action to preserve the peace. Predominantly, we're talking about United Nations blue-helmeted troops where a war has been going on. You've got the warring parties separated, and the blue helmets come in and keep them apart from each other because we have found that without that, even with a peace treaty, wars very often start back up again. The success of the UN peacekeeping has prevented countless wars from starting back up after they were ended through a negotiated process. My own story that I want to share with you very briefly, and I share it to indicate what private citizens, individuals can do to make a meaningful difference in building peace on this planet. I'd been president of the National Peace Corps Association, the organization of former Peace Corps volunteers, throughout most of the 1990s. While in that position, I got to meet a remarkable man named John Garamendi, who had been in the Peace Corps at the same time I had. I was in South America, he was in Ethiopia, in Africa, so we didn't meet each other. He came to Washington at that time as Deputy Secretary of the Interior, a pretty prestigious position, an important position. And we met because of the Peace Corps and became fast friends instantly. Many things in common, we just hit it off. We've been very, very close ever since. And in fact, he's the guy I work with right now. He's a member of Congress and I'm his Chief of Staff. But that just started just a few months ago. This was back 20 years ago. So we became friends, and he had just left the Department of the Interior, and I had just left the National Peace Corps Association in 1999, and my phone rang, and it was John. He said, "Chick, my friends are killing each other, and we've got to do something about it." He was talking about the Ethiopia-Eritrea border war. And I knew about the war, but hadn't really given it a second thought until John called. He said, "Well, I know about the war, I'm concerned about it, but I don't have a clue what we can do about it, but let's give it a try." So we got together, talked among ourselves about what we might do about it, and we got in touch with the two embassies, the embassies of the two countries. They said, "Please help. We've gotten ourselves into a terrible situation, and we don't know how to get out of it. Will you help us?" So we offered to help them, and we did. And it's a long story, and you got to get the book to read the story. But I'll give you the short version. We ended up meeting, started off with the ambassadors, built a trust relationship with them. And the reason we built a trust relationship with them, we were able to, begins with the Peace Corps. They had been taught by Peace Corps volunteers. They respected the Peace Corps. They respected John and myself for the positions and the things that we had done. But far more important than that is we came to them without a single solution to a single problem. Now that may sound counterintuitive. We came to them without a single solution to a single problem. Everybody else that had gone to them had said, "Here's what you need to do to stop this war." Now how do you react when somebody comes to you and says, "Here's what you need to do"? You bristle, you recoil against it, you push back against it. All of the other people that had gone to these guys had said the same thing. Here's what you need to do. We came in and simply said, "We're terribly concerned about this war. We served in the Peace Corps. We believe in peace. We believe that these conflicts can be worked out." And we didn't use the word stupid, but we basically said that this fighting makes no sense. And they agreed. Said, "Now, are you interested in us working together with you to help you find your path to a peaceful resolution?" And they said, "Yes, absolutely." And so over a 2-year period, we talked through and worked through with them, a process to bring about an end to the war. We met regularly with Isaias Afwerki, the president of Eritrea, and with Meles Zenawi, the prime minister of Ethiopia. At the end of the day, they had come down to the point where they had one last issue that had to be resolved. And it wasn't the people from the United Nations or Tony Lake, who President Clinton had assigned to meet with them and try to work it out. It was John Garamendi and Chic Dambach, two private citizens with nothing but our goodwill. And a small grant from the Hewlett Foundation that Melanie Greenberg was the program manager for that particular program. It helped cover most of our expenses. We paid a lot of it out of our own pocket, but Melanie, we appreciate the grant that made it possible to cover much of our travel costs. We were on the phone with Isaias Afwerki. One last concession that one or the other would have to make to put an end to this war. And he finally agreed to do it. And basically the way we put it to him, his pride was at stake, but we said to him, "Mr. President, your adversary, Meles Zenawi, has said that if you will make this one change in the sequence of the implementation of a ceasefire, he will stop fighting. The war will be over. Call him on it. Call him on it. You have the upper hand. You can call him on it." He said, "Aha, I have the upper hand." And he agreed. I jumped into a cab, went straight over to the Ethiopian embassy. The ambassador was not there. The deputy chief of mission, Fisaha Aduna, was there. He saw me immediately. We had become very good friends through this process. And I said, let's go over this one more time. You assure me that if Isaias agrees to the change in the modalities, the war will be over. Is that right? Yes, that's right. But he'll never do it. He's a warmonger. All he wants to do is fight, on and on and on. I said, well, I know how you feel, but I'm here to tell you that he just did. I can't believe you, he said. Pulled out my cell phone and said, well, call him. I had him on speed dial. You can't do that. He wouldn't let me even use my own cell phone from the Ethiopian embassy to call the Eritreans because there was an absolute prohibition of any communication between the two of them. When they wanted to talk with each other, we got a phone call and we conveyed the message. I said, okay, please convey the message to the Prime Minister that you've heard from me that Isaias has done what needs to be done. 2 weeks later, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia came to Washington, D.C. We were invited to the embassy to have breakfast. And over breakfast, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia leaned forward and said, I want you to know the war is over, and I want to thank you for making it happen. Whew. Not very many people get to hear that. We did. We went to the treaty signing ceremony in Algiers. And after the signing ceremony, we received a letter from Meles Zenawi that said, your contribution was indeed invaluable in creating the momentum and the spirit which made this historic achievement possible. We're pretty proud of what we did, feel awfully good about it. We never told anybody about it. Part of the reason I wrote the book is people would find out about it and say, Chick, people need to know this story. It's an incredible story. So I finally wrote the book, and people seem to be reading it and liking it. But something more happened that was, to me, even more important and more valuable. We were in Algiers for the signing ceremony. After the signing ceremony, I was buying a hot dog at the corner of 18th and L in Washington, D.C., at a kiosk. And the woman in this little mobile store looked like she was from Eritrea, and I asked her where she was from, and she very proudly said Eritrea. As if you know anybody from Eritrea, you know they're very proud of their heritage. I said, Eritrea. I said, well, I thought so. I said, I know your president, Isaias Afwerki. She just glared at me. Who are you? I said, I'm Chic Dambach. I know you. I know who you are. You brought peace to my country. I was devastated. I mean, not devastated. I was blown away. Hot dog vendor in the street of Washington, D.C., knew everything we had done. They'd followed every step of everything we had done through the Eritrean news. She knew me by name. We're now best of friends. Yeshu is one of the finest people on this planet. We are such dear friends. I just love her. The first time we did a book program after my book came out, she came to it. It was at Busboys and Poets in Washington. We had a great turnout, and Yeshu was there. And to be able to give her a big hug and just celebrate with her was one of the great moments of my life. So that's my own story of what we were able to do. And then I had the opportunity to provide some leadership for the Alliance for Peacebuilding to help build this whole concept of literally hundreds and even thousands of people doing what they could to help build a more peaceful world. I'm going to skip over a couple of things here, though I do need to spend a second on this particular slide. I'm fast running out of time. But one of the things that we did at the Alliance for Peacebuilding was to help build up U.S. government policies and programs with regard to building peace. We ran into a major confrontation a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, when the new Congress came in and was trying to slash and burn and cut everything in sight. And one of the things that they wanted to totally eliminate funding for was the U.S. Institute of Peace. Remember I mentioned that earlier on in the sequence of the development of the peace-building movement. USIP had just moved into a brand new building that gave it at least some profile. The U.S. Institute of Peace had rented space from the Restaurant Association. If you want to give an idea of how large this government agency was, it was letting a couple of floors of the Restaurant Association. Whoopee, what a commitment to peace that is. Well, they finally got a really nice building. They had just moved into it, and Congress voted to zero fund. Zero fund, not one penny for the U.S. Institute of Peace. And we were outraged, and we went into action, and we launched a grassroots campaign that went viral, literally reached millions of people, and got the attention of Congress, and we turned it around. While that was going on, the cartoonist for Politico, and if you're a political junkie, you know Politico. If you're not a political junkie, you don't know Politico, but it's a newspaper on Capitol Hill that everybody that works in Congress, you don't start your workday until you've read Politico. If you haven't read it, you lose your job. You just have to read Politico to know what's happening. Cartoonist for Politico, a guy named Matt Worker, created this cartoon to illustrate the, I'll use the word stupidity, of the vote to eliminate funding for the U.S. Institute of Peace. And it shows the Defense Department, this colossus over here, and then this little tiny building for U.S. Institute of Peace. Sorry, but with all the wars, we just can't afford a U.S. Institute of Peace. That cartoon was brilliant, and everybody on Capitol Hill saw it, and it helped change attitudes, and I picked it up and used it and sent it out to our network, and people saw it, and it just so graphically captured the essence of it. Now, but there's one problem with it, because if you look at that to scale, certainly the Institute of Peace is small and the Defense Department is much bigger. If that were done to scale, the Defense Department drawing would have to be 8 miles high. 8 miles high compared with that size for the U.S. Institute of Peace. And when this Congress wants to balance the budget, what do? Eliminate the U.S. Institute of Peace. Are you kidding me? Well, we stopped them. Institute of Peace took a cut, but it's still there. They talk about cutting the Pentagon budget. Did you know that they're talking about cutting it right now? It is not being cut. There is a slight cut between 2012 and 2013. Every year from then on, it continues to grow, and the military budget right now is higher than it was at the height of the Cold War. To prepare to fight against whom? Who? More than at the height of the Cold War, when we really had a forceful enemy with nuclear weapons aimed at us. Higher now than it was then, even adjusted for inflation. Higher now than it was then. I don't get it, and that's what we invest in building peace. Are you kidding me? Pardon me, I'm getting on my soapbox. Just a couple of other, no, I'll tell you what, I'm going to stop there. I've got a few more things that I could bring up. I'm going to stop there, but to do so, I do want to read something from the book, and this is the way I finished the book, because this is my message to you. As I finished the book, I wanted it to be for my children and for the young people. Because I meet so many people like those of you in this room, and I am so impressed. I've got one son who graduated in the 80s, and he's now in his 40s, and I'm sorry, his generation just didn't impress me. I've got 2 kids now who are, it's true, and I tell him that, and he says, you're right, Dad, we just didn't really care about very much, and most of us still don't. But the generation that's coming along right now, those of you that are going to Principia College right now, are awesome. And I have 2 kids at the University of Maryland. One just graduated, the other one's still there, and I see them and their friends say, wow, this is impressive. The world is in good hands. So here's how I finished the book. I can look back with satisfaction at the rocks pushed and the mountains climbed. See, now you see why I put that rock picture in there. I can look back at the rocks pushed and the mountains climbed. I've never reached the summit. I never will. No one ever does. But I found my place and my joy. Building peace is a heavy rock to push, but I have been privileged to be among those who move it ever higher. And now, as my friend Peter Yarrow urges us in song, for everything that matters, carry on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you very much for everyone for attending. If you have any questions for Mr. Dambach, there are 2 microphones that are set up in the main aisles here, and he is welcome to answer any of your questions. Thanks.
Any questions or comments?
So much for your talk and for being here at Principia. It's really inspiring to meet people in the peace building field. And I was just wondering, over the past 10 years since the term has come about and the work has begun, what type of progress have you seen in terms of peace building, both around the world, but especially in Washington, D.C., because I know there's a lot of resistance to the idea of peace building and that it's just not feasible.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There is progress. We're pushing the rock up the hill and it does roll back down sometimes. We're going through a difficult period right now, but overall, the sheer fact that members of Congress are even, and I don't mean all, but even some, are even contemplating this concept in this framework is brand new and very encouraging. And what I find when we talk with them about it is that they kind of think, gee, I never thought about it that way. And when they stop to think about it, say, you know, you're right. You know, you're right. Maybe we could take a different approach, and maybe that would be a smarter approach. So it's catching on. We worked over the last several years with the House and Senate Foreign Affairs committees. They were working on developing a new foreign aid bill, which is, the foreign aid bill is now 50 years old, and it is dreadfully convoluted and outmoded, and so they're wanting to come up with a brand new one. And in our work with them, they came up with 7 priorities for a new foreign aid bill. Number 2 among the 7 was peace building, using the word peace building. That had never, ever, ever happened before in the entire history of the United States government. Now, it's still in committee, hasn't been voted on, and it probably won't for a while. But just to get that far, it's probably taken another 10 years for it to get there. That's the way things work. But it's getting there. People are thinking about it and talking about it literally for the first time. The other thing that we're starting to get some progress on is getting away from this ludicrous notion that war is good for the economy. How many of you have heard people say war is good for the economy? You've all heard it, right? Is war good for the economy? If war is good for the economy, how come when we fight 2 wars, which should be doubly good for the economy crashes? Oops. Utter, total nonsense. Nonsense. War is dreadful for the economy. It gives a short-term blip in GNP and employment because you're paying a whole lot of people to go and fight a war. Everything else in the economy is harmed by it, and the long-term effects are disastrous. There's a growing recognition that war not only is not healthy for children and other living things, it's not even good for the economy. Well, if it's not good for the economy, it's not good for human beings, what is it good for? Not much. Not much. Growing recognition of that. And I continue, you know, I'm an idealist. I'm more optimistic and idealistic now than I was when I was your age, which is pretty stupid for a guy my age. But I am. I see progress. I've been around long enough to see enormous progress from what it was like when I was your age. So I say, yeah, keep at it. Don't give up. Keep at it. Thank you. Yes?
Hi. I'm with Veterans for Peace, and I just wanted to tell you that your quote from Eisenhower, we also love very much, and it's on the back of our T-shirts.
It's everywhere. It's
so
a great one.
Anyone who wants a T-shirt that says
Good.
that, veteransforpeace.org.
Thank you. Yes?
Well, thank you so much for being here and for your enthusiasm. It seems the obvious question is what happens, what do you do with, and I suppose, and this is the justification, I know that they're, of the military, of what they're, how they would justify. How do you deal with the rogue mentality, the dictatorship, the crazies out there who ideologically believe it's part of their ideology that to kill or to conquer other nations? And how do you deal with that mentality that is going to not listen?
Yeah. Excellent question, and I'll give a two-part response to it. First of all, it is a reality that there are rogues and there are megalomaniacs who seem to think that it is the right thing to do and it's the way to go about doing things, and that's why we have a military, and I'm not a pacifist. I'm not one who says we should unilaterally disarm and never get out a gun to defend oneself. I am 100% believe in the right to defend ourselves. Having said that, what the peace-building community is doing is trying to minimize that, and as this message can be conveyed and as more and more people at the community level as well as the nation-state level recognize that there are other ways and better ways to achieve what you probably want to achieve than the use of violent force, then fewer and fewer people will be inclined to go that way, and the crazies will have fewer and fewer followers. And if you can minimize the followers and the support that they get, then you'll see it become less and less. Do I believe that we will eliminate it for all time? No, I'm not inclined to think that, and so I think we're probably going to need to have some people with guns and with the ability to prevent the crazies from taking over for a long, long time. But we certainly can reduce it and minimize it, and that is where I believe we are making progress, and I think we'll continue to make progress. But I'm not ready to fold the tent on having the capacity to defend ourselves. When I go up to West Point and so on and talk with them, you know, I make that point. I start off saying, thank you guys. You know, I've got a family too, and I really appreciate what you do to help keep us safe. And then I give them my lecture and they say, thank you for doing what you're doing to make it less necessary for us to do what we're doing. Progress. Push that rock up the hill. Yes?
Hi, you talked a little bit about your experience in the Peace Corps. And if you talk to like different people, there's varied opinions nowadays about the effectiveness of the Peace Corps in the world today. I was wondering what your thoughts are about how effective the Peace Corps is in supporting world peace and peace building.
Excellent question. The Peace Corps is very effective at what it does, which is not that much directly related to peace building. It's a small part of peace building, but I have argued, I know every single director of the Peace Corps, every one, from Sergeant Shriver through Aaron Williams, the current director, a very good friend. Most of them are good friends of mine. And I've argued with every one of them, saying, where's the peace in Peace Corps? They say, well, you know, we really can't get involved in that kind of thing, and they can't. I understand that, but I continue to challenge them on it. The Peace Corps is very effective, first of all, as a benefit to the United States of America, because we have 9,000 people right now in other countries around the world having an extraordinary experience of learning to understand and respect other people and other cultures, and they will bring that back and help this country better understand those other people and other cultures and work with them in a more positive way for political reasons and for business reasons and every other kind of reason, including building peace. But it's only a tiny part of what the Peace Corps does. It also is helpful and effective in helping develop the skill levels of the people in the countries where the Peace Corps serves. And that's a good thing. So in that regard, and that's the real focus and purpose of the Peace Corps, it does a very, very good job of that. In terms of peace building, it does very, very little. The main thing it's done is create people like John Garamendi and Chic Dambach and a whole lot of others, because a lot of the people in the peace building movement are people who served in the Peace Corps and came out of it and said, I didn't do enough for peace while I was in the Peace Corps, I want to do more and better now. And so with the rest of our lives, we're able to do more in the actual direct peace building realm. Yes?
Hi. Mr. Dambach, thank you again so much for coming and for your inspiring talk. You talked about progress that was happening in Washington, but you also talked about being inspired by my generation. And so I'm wondering what specifically you've seen my generation do and what you'd like to see more of.
Well, what I have seen is a generation coming along that pays attention to what's going on in the world, that is incredibly well-informed and knowledgeable. I mean, you know, I had dinner with you guys tonight, and the dinner table conversation was fully as well-informed as the conversations I have in Washington with the people on the Foreign Affairs Committee, all right? And you folks are still in school. I'm blown away by the fact that, I mean, when I was in school, nobody had that kind of knowledge about what was going on in the world. Nobody did. And certainly my 40-year-old son who grew up in the 80s didn't know a thing about what was going on in the world. This generation does. And I see a spirit of a can-do spirit of saying, yes, and we're going to do something about it. So that's what really motivates me to say, yeah, this group coming along, they're really, really special. Not everybody, of course. You've got some of your colleagues who don't get that. But as a portion of any particular age group, and I think the data bears this out, there is a subset of your age group that is really engaged globally and locally and with a value set of saying, we can make this world better. Now, one of the things my generation has done as a great favor to you is leave you plenty of problems to solve. You know, we could have solved everything and you would have a boring life. You just wouldn't have anything to do. So we left you plenty, and I'm confident that you're going to do an awfully good job of dealing with them. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Could you comment on any suggestions that you have for internships, volunteer opportunities, or job paths for somebody who wants to dedicate a life to active peace building?
Sure. I'm the last one to ask about job paths. I'm on my 16th job. 16th job. And I'm going to figure out a career one of these days. I literally stumbled into peace building as a career. I'm not going to stand here and say you can make a great living as a peace builder, because it's not true. There are not very many jobs directly in the field of peace building. There are some, and a few of us have been incredibly lucky to be able to make a living doing what we do and what we're passionate about and what we love. But there are a whole lot of things that can be done. When we talk about peace building, it covers a wide range of things. Good health care is part of it, economic development. It's fine to go into business. And if you do business right and do it honorably, it can make a huge difference in building a more peaceful world. So I think the main thing is just have this as part of the value set and the mindset that you take into whatever career it is that you do. For your career, do what you're passionate about, as long as you can actually make a living at it too. But do what you're passionate about. In terms of internships, the non-government organizations tend to have internships. Alliance for Peacebuilding wouldn't survive without its interns. Our congressional office wouldn't survive without our interns. I think it's scandalous that they're unpaid internships. It's pure exploitation of people like you. But we do it, and since everybody does it, we just continue to do it. But at least it does provide an educational opportunity for you, and it opens doors and opportunities for you that you wouldn't otherwise have. So you can talk with Melanie about the Alliance for Peacebuilding, the whole network of organizations that it's affiliated with. You can certainly get in touch with our office to find out about internships on Capitol Hill, at the United Nations, State Department, wherever there are internship opportunities. In terms of education, if this is a path that you want to take, you can take a look at those peace study programs and study it and develop a career. It is possible to develop a career. There are government agencies. One of the slides I missed was going to kind of go over that, say here are the places, the various U.S. government agencies that do it and the non-government agencies that do it. So there are a number of places out there that do it. You find out about them, connect with them, do an internship, and it just might get you on a path where you can be directly and actively engaged in it. But don't think just because you're not going to be doing what Melanie and I do, or the other speakers that are here, that you're not helping build a more peaceful world. You can be a corporate executive and be helping build a more peaceful world. One of my favorites is a guy named Gordon Radley, retired just a couple of years ago after a rather successful career as the president of a little film company out in Marin County, California, called Lucasfilm. I don't know if you ever heard of him. But Gordon is one of the world's absolute fine human beings, former Peace Corps volunteer, absolutely committed to doing everything he can to help build a more peaceful world, and he does it. And in the way he ran that company, in the way he dealt with people all over the world, was in the back of his mind, what can I do in this process to help George Lucas become fabulously wealthy and help reduce conflict in the places where we're working? And he did that. And it can be done in many corporate environments, as well as government and non-government. Any others? Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, what is it that we can do at college here? Like, what would you suggest as our plan of action for right now?
I think there are a number of things you can do. You're probably not going to get to meet with the heads of state of a couple of countries that are at war and be able to talk them into stopping killing each other. That's not apt to happen. Might, but not apt to. But the first thing, of course, the main reason you're here is to learn as much as you can. I would urge you. Apparently, some 20% of the student body here is from other countries. Some 23, 25 countries represented. How many of you have gone out of your way to get to know the people from the other countries? I would hope all of you do. If you haven't, do it. Do it. Coming out of here tonight, next time you see somebody, and meet them from all over the world, become friends with them. These are fine people. They're here studying just like you are. Get to know them. Listen to them and learn from them about their cultures and how they operate. Develop and build a rapport, a mutual respect with them. The other certainly is the opportunity to become actively involved as advocates. There's something called the Student Peace Alliance. I love the Student Peace Alliance. Aaron Voldman is the head of it. Just do a Google search, Student Peace Alliance, become a member of it. They are very active in reaching members of Congress. I talked about saving the U.S. Institute of Peace. The best phone call I made was to Aaron Voldman saying, Aaron, we got a problem. We need your help. Get the students involved in this, and he did in a big way. I don't think any group became more actively involved in it than the Student Peace Alliance. So there are certainly advocacy opportunities that you have. And arrange for opportunities for your colleagues and for people in this community and wherever you're from to start listening and learning. The way movements happen is people start talking about it. It's viral. And get somebody to come and talk to the Rotary Club about this kind of thing. 90% of the people at the Rotary Club have never heard the word peace building, never even thought about it. But they are very influential in their community and on the leadership. So those are among the kinds of things that you can do. All right. Any others? Sure.
I was just wondering if you could touch on the role of religion in peace building and how it's often talked about as more on the conflict side.
Yep, good question. And it comes down on both sides, as we well know. You see several of the worst conflicts in the world have a religious connection to it, not necessarily religious base, but a religious connection to it. At the same time, some of the most extraordinary conflict resolution, peace-building people, certainly in this country and worldwide, come at it from a faith base. John Paul Lederach is one of our heroes in this field, and one of the real pioneers and the great minds, absolutely dedicated to building peace. He's been all over the world, done extraordinary work, and it's rooted in his Christian faith. Deeply rooted in his Christian faith. Without that, he may or may not be doing it, but I know that it's rooted in his faith. In the membership of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, I don't know the exact number, but probably close to half of the organizations in one way or another have some sort of connection with faith-based, and many of them it is the core value that drives them to be doing what they're doing. So on the whole, I come down on the side of saying that it's a good thing. I just get troubled when people become fanatical about it and say, I've got the only answer, God talks to me, and he doesn't talk to you, and therefore I've got to wipe you out because you may be a bad influence on people. That's when it gets to be a real problem, and of course we see that happen on all sides. All sides. It's not just Muslims. It's Christians and others through the ages have done exactly the same thing, and even on a larger scale, more brutal than anything that Al-Qaeda ever dreamed of doing. So it's universal, but it's a small part of religion. It's the fanatical fringe that behaves that way. The reasonable, moderate center tends to be committed to building peace, and many get behind these things in a very big and important way. Without them, the peace-building movement would not be what it is today. We'll take two. We had two people standing up, so we'll take both of those.
Right.
I'll try to give shorter answers. All right. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, as we go into an election year this year, if you could speak to some of the things that you and your colleagues are thinking about and looking for.
Good question. Of course, that's kind of unfair. I'm involved in politics right now, and all you have to do is a Google search, and you'll find out which party John Garamendi's a part of, and then you say he's got his bias. But having said that, I do want to look for political leadership that is not so arrogant about America's role in the world. There is this notion that we're right, the rest of the world is wrong, and if they don't agree with us, we've got to use whatever force and might we have to cram it down their throats. And I'm sorry, it's just wrong. Just wrong. We have a vital leadership role. I think we are one of, if not the greatest country in the history of mankind, but I don't want to be the one saying that. I want somebody else to say that. You know, if my kids come home from school and say, I'm the best student in school, say, I want your teacher to tell me that. I don't want you to be the one telling me that. And I feel that way about this country. So I want to see a little bit of humility about this country and our role in the world, respect and appreciation for our role in the world, a commitment to play a leadership role, not a hegemonic role, but a leadership role moving toward a more peaceful world. To the extent that I can see that in the candidates, they'll have my support regardless of party. And by the way, there are some people in the party that I'm not a member of who we work with very closely who share every bit of, who could have given my speech tonight and believed every word of it. So this is not necessarily a partisan issue. This is a question of values. Okay, one more question and a real short answer.
Very interesting what you did with Eritrea and Ethiopia. One of the biggest conflicts right now, most difficult I would say, is what's going on in Syria. And Kofi Annan at this point doesn't seem to even be able to solve it. If the UN came to you and said, Chic, you're up, what would you do?
I thought we only had one last question before. Wow. It's one of the toughest questions that the world community is facing right now. The responsibility to protect doctrine that was put into place in 2005 clearly applies to Syria. The leadership is obviously brutally violating the responsibility to protect. The problem is, as we all know, it is not clear what the opposition stands for and is doing and even how they're carrying it about. And if there were to be a military intervention to try to weaken the regime, as was done successfully in Libya, it is not as clear that it would have the same outcome. That is, that the regime would be toppled, and that it could result in even greater violation of the life and the rights of the people of Syria. So a path forward is simply not clear. I think we need to make every effort to better understand the dynamics of what's going on, who's involved, and what the prospects are for any of several paths to try to deal with it, but to take it very seriously, be as deeply engaged in it as possible, and, by the way, make sure that it's not just the United States that is doing it. We cannot be the savior of every issue and every conflict in the world. In fact, in many cases, and very often in the Middle East, we're the last one that ought to be doing it, because once again it's perceived as the United States coming in, killing Muslims, and there's resistance to us doing that, as understandably there would be. So I think working with the Arab League, which is beginning to recognize a greater responsibility and role to police their own neighborhood and deal with these issues, to the extent that the Arab League can step forward, as they did with regard to Libya, to step forward and play a leadership role. We need to be encouraging them and helping them do that, and then bring more and more of the entire world community together behind it, including Russia and China, so that you build a global commitment to address the problem and the issue. But I don't claim to be Solomon. I don't have the answers to all of them, and a lot of people a lot smarter than me have been trying to figure it out, and nobody has figured it out yet. Because it is extremely complex and difficult. We often talk about prevention, and I think if more had been done early on to try to bring about the kind of change that we've seen in some of the other countries, that we might have been able to avert this from happening in the first place, but it's it is where it is right now, and as I say, all we can do right now is encourage the people in a position to learn more, to better understand, work with the Syrians to find their solution to this problem is about the best we can do right now. But I'm afraid it's going to take time, and I'm afraid there's going to be a lot more bloodshed before it finally sorts itself out. It's a real tragedy. Well, thank you all very much for your kind attention and your support, and all the best. Carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dambach, again, and thank you all for being here. If you are interested in buying Mr. Dambach's phenomenal book, Exhaust the Limits, you are welcome to join us, and you can purchase them here on stage. He'll be signing books and greeting you all. If you'd like to buy a book or just greet him in person, you're welcome to form a line to the left of the stage right here. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.